The fluorescent lights of the 911 dispatch room hummed with a monotonous rhythm, a constant backdrop to the orchestrated chaos of emergencies. Sarah, a seasoned dispatcher with over a decade of calming voices and directing help, sat before her multi-screen console, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Her posture was relaxed, yet alert, a testament to countless hours spent navigating the thin line between panic and professionalism. The scent of stale coffee mingled with the faint metallic tang of ozone from the electronics, a familiar aroma that had long since become synonymous with her demanding career. She handled each incoming call with an almost automatic grace, her voice a soothing balm over crackling lines, guiding callers through their worst moments. From fender benders to full-blown house fires, Sarah had heard it all, or so she thought. Her ability to compartmentalize the raw emotions pouring through her headset was legendary among her colleagues. This evening, however, felt different, though she couldn't pinpoint why. Perhaps it was the unusually quiet lull between calls, a stillness that often preceded a storm. Then, a new line lit up, its insistent flash cutting through the dim quiet. Sarah took a deep breath, adjusted her headset, and answered, her voice clear and steady. 911, what's your emergency? A male voice responded, surprisingly calm, almost eerily so, given the gravity of his report. Yes, I believe there's an intruder in my home. Sarah's professional instincts kicked in immediately. Can you confirm your address for me, sir? And are you currently in a safe location? She began typing, her eyes scanning the incoming data on her screen. The caller provided an address, his tone unwavering. He claimed to be in his bedroom, hidden, but his voice lacked any tremor of fear or urgency. It was a peculiar detachment that made a subtle alarm bell ring in Sarah's mind. Can you describe the intruder, sir? Any sounds you've heard? What makes you believe someone is inside? Sarah pressed, trying to extract concrete details. The caller's responses were vague, lacking the vivid, fear-fueled descriptions she typically received during such calls. He spoke of movement downstairs, a feeling, but nothing substantial. No forced entry, no distinct sounds, no visual confirmation. It was as if he was narrating a story rather than experiencing a terrifying event. A flicker of unease, faint but persistent, began to prick at Sarah. This wasn't the typical panicked homeowner. His composure was too perfect, too rehearsed. She tried to push the feeling down, attributing it to the late hour or her own fatigue. Every protocol demanded she treat every call seriously, regardless of her intuition. Sir, I'm dispatching officers to your location. Please stay on the line with me. Can you confirm if you have any weapons in the house? Sarah's fingers hovered over the dispatch button, waiting for more information, for anything to ground this call in reality. Before he could answer, a sharp, sudden click echoed through Sarah's headset. The line went dead. She frowned, pulling the headset slightly away from her ear, then pressing it back. Nothing. Just the faint static of an open line. The call had disconnected abruptly, leaving Sarah in a state of suspended animation, the vague details of the home invasion hanging in the air. A cold, unsettling feeling began to creep up her spine, a premonition that this was far from over. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Sarah stared at the dead line, a knot tightening in her stomach. The abrupt disconnection was unusual, especially for a call reporting such a serious incident. She immediately attempted to reconnect, hitting the redial button with a practiced swiftness born of years of emergency response. The system whirred, then reported a busy signal. Her brow furrowed further. It shouldn't be busy if the line had just disconnected. A shiver traced its way down her spine, a sensation she usually associated with the draft from the air conditioning. But this felt different, more insidious. Just as she was about to flag the call for a supervisor, another incoming line flashed, the same number appearing on her screen. Her eyes narrowed. He was calling back. A flicker of relief, quickly overshadowed by a deepening unease, washed over her. Perhaps it was just a technical glitch, a momentary lapse in service. She answered, her professional composure firmly back in place, though a subtle tension now resided beneath her calm exterior. 911, this is Sarah. You just called us, sir. The voice on the other end was indeed the same, but now it was clearer, sharper, devoid of the almost performative vagueness from moments before. There was a distinct edge to it, an unsettling confidence. Yes, Sarah, I did. The way he pronounced her name sent an unexpected jolt through her. Dispatchers rarely gave out their names unless specifically asked, and she hadn't offered hers. She dismissed it as a simple oversight on her part. Perhaps he'd heard it from a colleague, or it was visible on her console. Then he spoke again, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. You know, Sarah, you looked quite thoughtful just now, staring at that blank screen, almost as if you were wondering if you'd left the stove on this morning before you rushed out the door. Sarah's breath hitched. Her hand, poised over the keyboard, froze mid-air. She had indeed been thinking about the stove, a fleeting, almost unconscious thought that had crossed her mind less than a minute ago, a petty worry amidst the high-stakes drama of her job. It was a private thought, one she hadn't voiced, hadn't even consciously acknowledged until he had articulated it. A cold dread began to seep into her bones. How do you know that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the professionalism momentarily forgotten. The caller chuckled, a low, unnerving sound that seemed to echo directly inside her skull. Oh, Sarah, such a vibrant shade of blue for your coffee mug today. Quite a contrast to the usual muted tones, wouldn't you say? Her gaze snapped downwards, her eyes widening in horror. On her desk, directly in her line of sight, sat her favorite mug, a bright, almost cerulean blue, a recent gift from her niece. She had picked it specifically that morning, a small rebellion against the gray monotony of her routine. Her usual mugs were indeed beige or white. A tremor ran through her hand, the one still hovering over the keyboard. This was no coincidence. This was impossible. Before she could process the implications, he continued, his voice a silken thread weaving itself around her rising panic. And you just adjusted your headset, didn't you? A slight tilt to the left, a subtle pressure against your ear, as if trying to clear away a sudden ringing. Or perhaps a growing sense of disbelief. Sarah's fingers flew to her headset, confirming his observation. She had, almost imperceptibly, adjusted it just seconds ago, a nervous gesture she hadn't even registered until he described it. The cold dread that had started as a trickle was now a full, icy torrent, engulfing her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, terrifying realization. He wasn't just guessing, he was seeing her. He was watching her right now, in the sterile, supposedly secure environment of the 911 dispatch room. The air around her suddenly felt thin, suffocating. Sarah's composure, usually an impenetrable shield against the chaos of her work, fractured visibly. Her voice, when it finally emerged, was a raw, trembling whisper, barely audible above the hum of the dispatch room. How are you doing this? The question was less an inquiry and more a desperate plea, an unraveling of her carefully constructed professional facade. Her mind raced, grappling with the impossible, searching for any logical explanation, however far-fetched. Was it a prank? A sophisticated hacking attempt? But the details were too precise, too immediate. The caller's response was a soft, almost tender chuckle, a sound that sent a fresh wave of ice through her veins. Let's just say, Sarah, I have a very keen eye and a profound interest in your work, and in you. The words hung in the air, thick with an unspoken threat, a chilling implication of pervasive, relentless observation. He wasn't just watching. He was studying, analyzing, absorbing every minute detail of her existence. Then, as if to underscore his omnipresence, he continued, his voice a low, insidious murmur. "You're leaning forward now, aren't you? Your shoulders slightly hunched, your left hand resting on your mouse, but I can see the faint tremor in your fingers. A natural response to unexpected attention." Her eyes, wide with terror, darted frantically across the dispatch room. She scanned every corner, every shadow, every seemingly innocuous object. Was there a pinhole camera hidden in the ceiling tile? A tiny lens concealed within the clock on the wall? Her gaze swept over the air vents, the fluorescent light fixtures, the backs of her colleagues' heads. The thought was absurd, yet the evidence was irrefutable. He was describing her actions in real time, actions she herself was barely conscious of performing. The idea of an intruder, a physical presence, seemed almost quaint compared to the insidious creep of this digital, unseen surveillance. The horrifying realization slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just observing, he was actively narrating her present. This wasn't a pre-recorded feed, not a delayed observation. He was seeing her now. The sterile, brightly lit dispatch room, once a fortress of order and control, transformed into a transparent cage. Every movement, every breath, every flicker of emotion on her face was being meticulously catalogued, analyzed, absorbed by this unseen tormentor. The walls that had always offered a sense of security now felt porous, invisible, offering no protection from his penetrating gaze. "You fascinate me, Sarah," the caller purred, his voice dripping with a perverse adoration that made her skin crawl. "The way you handle the pressure, the calm under fire. It's truly captivating. I've watched you for a while now, you know, longer than you might think." His words painted a grotesque picture. A silent, dedicated observer, lurking in the digital ether, meticulously documenting her life, her habits, her reactions. The home invasion call, she now understood with sickening clarity, had merely been a pretext. A carefully crafted lure to ensnare her, to draw her into his twisted game. The initial vagueness, the abrupt disconnection, the immediate callback, it was all part of a meticulously orchestrated plan. He hadn't needed her help. He had needed her attention, and now he had it, irrevocably. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating her with the invisible weight of his gaze. She was trapped, exposed, and utterly helpless. The routine call had curdled into a nightmare, and she was its unwitting star. Sarah's mind raced, a frantic scramble for any shred of control. Her fingers, still trembling, hovered over the keyboard, instinctively seeking the call trace function. It was her duty, her training, her only defense against this insidious assault. She had to find him, to pin him down, to expose the unseen predator. Her eyes darted towards the blinking lights on her console, the digital pathways that could perhaps lead her to him. But the caller, as if privy to her very thoughts, interrupted her desperate attempt. "Ah, Sarah, I see your little finger dancing towards that trace button. Such predictable movements, my dear. But I assure you, it's quite futile. A wasted effort. Really. You won't find me that way." His voice held a note of smug amusement, a cruel satisfaction in anticipating her every move. It was as if he wasn't merely observing her, but inhabiting her mind, her intentions laid bare before him. A cold wave of despair washed over her. He wasn't just watching her, he was inside her head, predicting her actions before she even fully formed them. Her hopes of a quick resolution, of leveraging her professional tools, evaporated. The dispatch room, which had once felt like her command center, now felt like a stage where she was the unwilling performer, every gesture choreographed by an unseen director. "You know that little silver locket around your neck?" he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The one with the faded engraving, 'Forever Yours.' A charming sentiment, wouldn't you agree? Especially for something so very, very old." A gasp escaped Sarah's lips. The locket. It was tucked beneath her uniform, a deeply personal memento, never seen by anyone in the dispatch room, a secret comfort she wore every day. It was indeed old, a family heirloom, and the inscription was almost completely worn away, visible only upon close inspection. No one, absolutely no one in her professional life knew about it. The significance of that detail, so mundane yet so profoundly intimate, hit her with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just surveillance, this was an excavation of her very soul. The fear that had been a cold, creeping dread now intensified into a desperate, visceral need to escape, to tear herself away from his omnipresent gaze. Her eyes flickered towards Mark, her colleague seated a few desks away, engrossed in his own call. She needed help, a lifeline, a silent plea for rescue. With painstaking slowness, she shifted her weight, subtly angling her body, hoping to catch his eye without drawing the caller's attention. She intended to mouth a silent word, a desperate signal for assistance. But before her lips could even form the unspoken plea, the caller's voice cut through the air, sharp and immediate. Now, Sarah. Don't be so impolite. It's just you and I right now. No need to involve your little friend Mark, is there? He's quite busy with Mrs. Henderson's cat stuck up a tree. Bless her heart. Let's not distract him from such important work, shall we?" Sarah froze, her attempted signal stillborn. He hadn't just seen her shift. He had known her intent, identified her colleague, and even knew the nature of Mark's current call. It was an impossible feat, a terrifying demonstration of his absolute control. His casual dismissal of her colleague, his intimate knowledge of the dispatch room's inner workings, solidified the chilling reality. He wasn't just watching her from afar. He was somehow, inexplicably, embedded within her immediate environment. The walls of her perceived safety crumbled entirely, leaving her exposed and utterly vulnerable. The dispatch room, once her sanctuary, had become her prison. He had warned her, subtly but unequivocally, against seeking help. And now, she understood the weight of that warning. The caller's voice, which had been a chillingly calm instrument of psychological warfare, now shifted. It took on a lighter, almost theatrical quality, edged with a playful yet deeply unsettling sadism. "Oh, Sarah," he purred, a sound that made her stomach clench. "This is getting dull. All this tracing and signaling. We need to liven things up a bit, don't you think? A little game, perhaps. A test of your renowned abilities, yes?" His suggestion hung in the air, a perverse invitation that promised only further torment. He paused, as if savoring her silent dread, then continued. "Tell me, do you ever worry about that tiny scar just below your left eyebrow? It's almost imperceptible, a faint silver line, but I've noticed how your finger sometimes brushes over it when you're deep in thought. A small imperfection, yet it adds such character. Don't you agree?" Sarah's breath hitched. The scar. It was from a childhood accident, a nearly invisible mark she rarely thought about, let alone discussed. The fact that he had not only noticed it, but had also observed her subconscious habit of touching it, sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. It wasn't just physical surveillance. It was an intimate knowledge of her unconscious mannerisms, a terrifying testament to the depth of his intrusion. He was dissecting her, piece by painful piece, exposing her vulnerabilities with surgical precision. The realization of how deeply he had delved into her personal space, how utterly exposed she was a crushing weight. So, "Here's our game, Sarah," he announced, his voice now laced with an almost childish glee. "I want you to tell your colleague, Mark, something for me. Something very specific. And I want you to make sure he understands it's from me." His instruction was delivered with an unnerving casualness, a challenge wrapped in an undeniable threat. He wasn't merely observing anymore. He was dictating her actions, forcing her into a horrifying complicity. He was trying to break her, to shatter the professional facade she had meticulously built over years, to turn her into a puppet in his twisted play. The implication of his words was clear. If she didn't comply, the consequences would be dire, not just for her, but perhaps for Mark or anyone else he chose to involve. He was testing her limits, pushing her to the brink of her sanity, enjoying the spectacle of her unraveling. Her mind raced, desperately trying to construct a scenario, an explanation, anything that could rationalize his impossible knowledge. Was he a former colleague? A disgruntled ex-employee with access to sensitive information? But even that didn't explain the real-time observations, the intimate details. "I'm closer than you think, Sarah," he whispered, his voice dropping to a low, intimate tone that invaded her personal space, made her feel as though he were breathing down her neck. Much, much closer. The words were designed to sow maximum terror, to create an inescapable sense of claustrophobia. He wanted her to feel hunted, to feel the cold breath of his presence just behind her. Her eyes involuntarily darted to her computer screen, a dark mirror reflecting her own face. In the dim glow, she saw a distorted image of herself. Wide, terrified eyes, a pale complexion, lips slightly parted in a silent gasp. It was a grotesque caricature of her fear, an amplified version of the dread that was rapidly consuming her. And then she saw it, or thought she did. A faint, almost imperceptible flicker in the reflection, as if another shadow had momentarily passed behind her, just outside the frame of her peripheral vision, a fleeting distortion in the digital glass. Her breath caught in her throat. He wasn't just close, he was here. The game had indeed begun, and she was already losing. Sarah, despite the icy tendrils of terror coiling around her heart, fought to reclaim some semblance of agency. Her mind, a whirlwind of fear and frantic calculation, desperately sought a weakness, an opening in the caller's impenetrable facade. She decided to bait him, to prod for any sliver of information that might betray his location or identity. "What do you want?" she managed, her voice steadier than she felt, a thin veneer of defiance masking her profound dread. "What is this game really about?" His response was immediate, a low chuckle that resonated with chilling amusement. "Ah, Sarah, always so direct, always seeking the why. But the why is irrelevant, isn't it? The what is far more engaging." He deflected her attempt with an infuriating ease, his enigmatic persona remaining frustratingly intact. It was as if he anticipated her every move, every tactical shift in her desperate mental chess match. Then, his voice sharpened, a new edge of casual cruelty entering his tone. "Speaking of engagement, your friend Mark just spilled coffee on his keyboard. Such a clumsy fellow, isn't he? Always rushing." Sarah's head snapped towards Mark's desk. Indeed, a dark stain bloomed across his workspace as he frantically dabbed at it with a tissue, his face a mask of mild annoyance. The sheer, impossible specificity of the detail sent another jolt of pure, unadulterated fear through her. He wasn't just observing her, he was observing everyone in the room with unnerving precision. It wasn't just a hidden camera aimed at her desk. It was a pervasive, omnipresent gaze that encompassed the entire dispatch floor. The realization was a crushing blow. This wasn't merely a stalker with a few well-placed bugs. This was someone with a sophisticated network, or perhaps an almost supernatural technological prowess that allowed him to see and hear everything. The thought made her skin crawl. The security of the dispatch room, a place designed to protect and serve, had been utterly compromised. A desperate, primal urge to disconnect the call seized her, to simply end the torment, to sever the invisible thread that bound her to his malicious game. Her finger twitched, hovering millimeters above the end call button on her console. But then, a cold dread washed over her. What if disconnecting only escalated his wrath? What if it triggered some unseen, more terrifying consequence? The unknown was a gaping maw, far more terrifying than the current, unbearable reality. As if reading her very thoughts, the caller's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, laced with a warning that was both subtle and absolute. "Thinking of cutting me off, Sarah? Tisk. That would be a rather impolite conclusion to our little chat, wouldn't it? And trust me, you wouldn't want to be impolite. Not with me." The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air, a chilling promise of retribution that froze her hand in midair. He knew her every thought, her every impulse. He continued, his voice a soft, hypnotic drone, painting a vivid picture of her own internal struggle. "I can see the tension in your jaw, Sarah. That slight clenching, the way your teeth are almost grinding. And your breath, it catches, doesn't it?" A little gasp, almost imperceptible to anyone else. But I hear it. I see it all. His words were a suffocating shroud, wrapping around her, stealing the very air from her lungs. He wasn't just describing her physical reactions. He was describing the raw, unfiltered terror that was consuming her from within. He was a master puppeteer, and she, Sarah, the seasoned dispatcher, the unflappable professional, was his helpless marionette, dancing to his horrifying tune. The game was far from over. It was merely entering a more sinister phase, one where her every breath, every heartbeat, was his to observe and control. The caller's demands, once veiled in subtle threats and psychological games, now shed their pretense, escalating into something far more personal, far more invasive. His voice, a chillingly calm instrument of torment, began to weave a narrative that punched through Sarah's professional defenses, striking at the very core of her being. "Do you remember," he began, his tone almost nostalgic, "the old locket your grandmother gave you? The one with the tiny, faded photograph of her and your grandfather? You used to trace the engraving on its back when you were little, imagining their love story, didn't you? You still do sometimes when you're feeling particularly vulnerable." A gasp tore from Sarah's throat, ragged and involuntary. The locket. It sat in a small velvet box on her bedside table, a cherished relic, a private sanctuary of memory. No one knew about her ritual of tracing the worn engraving, no one she had ever shared that intimate detail with. It was a secret kept close, a comfort reserved for her deepest moments of solitude. His knowledge of it was an unbearable violation, a brutal invasion of her most sacred inner world. Her carefully constructed emotional defenses, honed over years of dealing with human tragedy and chaos, crumbled into dust. Tears, hot and stinging, welled in her eyes, blurring the sterile lines of the dispatch room. The professional facade, painstakingly maintained through hours of relentless pressure, shattered into 1,000 pieces, revealing the raw, terrified woman beneath. She felt exposed, stripped bare, her very soul laid open for his inspection. "Please," she choked out, her voice raw with terror, barely a whisper. The word was an agony, torn from the deepest recesses of her fear. "Please stop. Just stop." It was a plea born of utter desperation, an admission of defeat, a surrender to the overwhelming power he wielded over her. The sound of her own broken voice echoed in her ears, a testament to how profoundly he had succeeded in breaking her. The caller, far from showing any mercy, seemed to relish her distress. His voice dropped to a low, satisfied purr, a sound that sent shivers down her spine, chilling her to the bone. "Ah, Sarah," he murmured, the tears. Such a beautiful, honest expression of feeling. There it is, a single tear, tracing a delicate path down your left cheek, catching the fluorescent light just so. His description was delivered with an almost clinical precision, yet laced with a perverse adoration, as if he were a connoisseur of her suffering. He wasn't just observing her. He was dissecting her pain, savoring every nuance of her unraveling. Just as the tear reached the corner of her trembling mouth, a movement in her peripheral vision registered. Mark, her colleague, who had been engrossed in his coffee spill crisis, slowly turned his head. His eyes, initially focused on his keyboard, drifted towards Sarah, drawn by the palpable shift in the room's atmosphere, the sudden, sharp silence that had fallen around her console. His brow furrowed in concern, a silent question forming on his lips as he registered her trembling form, the glistening tracks on her cheeks. "And now," the caller's voice took on a triumphant edge, a note of ultimate victory. "Your friend notices. He sees your distress. He sees the masterpiece I have created." His words were a final, crushing blow, cementing her isolation even amidst her colleagues. He had not only broken her, he had ensured that her breakdown was a public spectacle, a testament to his absolute control. The game was no longer confined to her mind. It had spilled into the tangible world, drawing others into its sinister orbit. The horror of it all was almost too much to bear. The caller, having savored his triumph, delivered a final, chilling statement, a promise that echoed with the insidious threat of perpetual observation. "This isn't over, Sarah. Not by a long shot. Consider this merely an introduction, a glimpse behind the curtain. I will always be watching." His words were a cold, venomous whisper that slithered into every corner of the dispatch room, settling like a shroud over Sarah's trembling form. He hadn't just tormented her. He had claimed her, branded her with the indelible mark of his presence. There was no escape, no refuge from his gaze. Then, with an unnerving precision that defied belief, he described an action she was about to take, an almost unconscious reflex, before her own mind had even fully registered the impulse. "You're going to reach for that small silver pen on your desk, aren't you? The one with the worn grip. Your comfort object, a futile attempt to ground yourself." Just as the words left his lips, Sarah's hand, as if compelled by an unseen force, began to move, a slow, deliberate tremor towards the very object he had named. Her fingers brushed against the cool metal, confirming his impossible foresight, solidifying her utter helplessness. She was a puppet, her strings pulled by an invisible, malevolent master. Sarah remained frozen, a statue carved from terror and despair. Her hand hovered over the pen, her breath caught in her throat, her eyes wide and unseeing, fixed on the console screen, as if it held the answers to her nightmare. She was unable to move, unable to speak, her mind a chaotic storm of fear and disbelief. The world around her seemed to blur, receding into a distant, muffled hum. All that remained was the omnipresent awareness of his gaze, the suffocating knowledge that she was perpetually exposed. Her colleague, Mark, now fully aware of her distress, approached her console with hurried steps. Concern was etched deeply on his face, a stark contrast to the casual indifference he had shown moments before. His eyes, usually filled with the mundane focus of his own tasks, were now wide with alarm as he took in Sarah's pale, tear-streaked face and the rigid, almost catatonic posture of her body. He opened his mouth, a question forming, a worried syllable about to break the oppressive silence that had descended upon her workstation. And then, just as Mark's shadow fell across her desk, the caller's voice, which had dominated her world for what felt like an eternity, suddenly stopped. There was no click, no dial tone, no abrupt cut-off. It simply ceased to be, vanishing as abruptly and mysteriously as it had begun. The line went dead, leaving behind an empty, echoing silence that was almost more terrifying than his voice had been. It was the silence of a void, a chilling testament to his ability to appear and disappear at will, leaving only destruction in his wake. Sarah stared at the blank screen of her console, the digital clock ticking on, oblivious to the horror it had just witnessed. The weight of the silence pressed down on her, a physical burden that threatened to crush her. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the lingering echoes of his words, the phantom sensation of his eyes upon her. The air in the dispatch room, once a cacophony of urgent calls and professional chatter, now felt thin and cold, charged with the palpable residue of fear. The only sound that remained, filling the vast, cavernous space of her shattered reality, was the ragged, desperate panting of her own breathing. Each gasp for air was a testament to her survival, yet also a horrifying reminder of the ordeal she had just endured. Her chest heaved, her lungs burning, struggling to pull in enough oxygen, struggling to process the impossible truth of what had just transpired. The nightmare had ended, but its shadow would forever cling to her, a constant, chilling reminder that she was, and perhaps always would be, watched. The world had irrevocably shifted, and Sarah, the once unflappable dispatcher, was left adrift in its unsettling new reality.